But a most important element must be taken into consideration, tending materially to strengthen our argument. The sessions in those times were chosen by the people, and they were then settled upon a basis far more broad than even the purest Presbyterian churches of the present day. A multitude of elders existed in a congregation, of whom a certain number was engaged in active service by rotation, a circumstance which explains an act of the Assembly in 1642, empowering old sessions to elect some of the elders already ordained to the active discharge of their official duties. Such being the character and constitution of sessions, it is manifest that when they were so strictly representatives of the people, and when their selection of a minister was so directly modified by popular control, the minister was to all intents and purposes the choice of the people. So the practice of the church, in relation to this matter, was regarded by some of the most eminent men of that day. Brown of Wamfrey, in his apologetical relation, with reference to the abolition of patronage in 1649, mentions, quote, "After this, ministers entered by the call of the people of whom they were to have charge," unquote. The same writer, in assigning reasons on account of which the Presbyterian ministers could not accept of presentations after the Restoration, states, quote, "By taking their presentations now, they do upon the matter declare that they were not duly called before, and so they condemn the way of entry by election," unquote. Dr. McCree, commenting on the provisions of the Directory of 1649, assures us that, quote, "It did not give to the session the formal election, but merely the nomination or proposal of a person to the congregation," unquote. From these considerations we conclude that if the appointment of ministers, according to the last act of the Second Reformation on the subject, was not managed formally by the votes, it was not substantially by the voice of the people. Nor must we omit to add that indeed no one acquainted with the theological literature of the period disputes that distinct assertions of the right of the people to choose their ministers might be cited from the works of the most eminent reformers to whom Scotland was indebted for the establishment of presbytery in 1638. Number 5. Popular election may be vindicated on the ground of enlightened expediency, and here a footnote. It may be thought an omission that no part of this lecture has been devoted to the refutation of objections against popular election. If I have at all succeeded in proving that it is a scriptural principle, any objection which human ingenuity can devise against it will be light as dust in the balances of the sanctuary. And I am the more confirmed in this view when it is notorious that the grounds on which by far the ablest and most respectable antagonists of the people's claims express dislike to the election of ministers by the votes of the members of the church are based chiefly on expediency. The argument which they commonly urge, fortified doubtless by some examples, is the alleged unfitness of the people to exercise any such privilege. Some men are heard, with more wit than wisdom, expatiating on the uproar and confusion which would be the invariable concomitant of popular election. We believe, however, that such an argument as the latter is beneath serious refutation, being practically contradicted by the testimony of every church where popular election has prevailed, and because the principle involved in the objection would justify an absolute despotism and reconcile us to the Roman policy, quote, "Solitudinem faciunt passum appellant," unquote. We cannot think, however, that the former objection, the alleged incapacity of the people, weighs with the consciences of men, with many conscientious men, nor shall we be so disingenuous as to refuse the acknowledgment that cases sometimes occur in which, by unhappy divisions, the people betray their own cause, and afford some ground for the allegation of their enemies. We are not in the habit of claiming for the people infallibility any more than for the Pope. But if the objection is sound to any extent, we should instantly abolish all church courts, for these too, as well as congregations, are sometimes rent with the most unhappy divisions. Nor is this all. Wherever this unfitness on the part of the people to choose a minister arises from their worldliness and immorality, then unquestionably they are unfit, and by all means let them be excluded, not only from this, but every other privilege of the church. But if this alleged unfitness arise generally from their incapacity in any circumstances to discern ministerial gifts, then assuredly the person urging this objection must be prepared in consistency to advocate thorough and unqualified intrusion. Is it not the highest absurdity to admit that the people have capacity to sit in judgment upon preachers so as to reject them, and yet cannot be entrusted with the right of choosing? In short, in point of real principle, there is no middle course between high-handed intrusion and popular election. The opponent of the latter will be consistent in his reasonings. To be consistent in his reasonings, must be prepared, obviously, to advocate the former. We repeat it. If the people be not fit to choose their ministers, they are unfit to exercise any veto whatever upon their nomination. It seems to be generally thought that evil will result from entrusting church courts with the privilege of nominating ministers to vacant parishes and congregations. However excellent might be the members composing these courts, men in their collective capacity are often seen stooping to actions from which individually they would have shrunk, and presbyteries, it is feared, would be under temptations to promote the advantage of friends and relatives, sometimes to the neglect of the spiritual interests of a congregation. The proper mode of preventing such results is to enlarge the constituency by entrusting the people with the right of choice. Since, however, the fact is admitted that the mode of appointing ministers by church courts is universally condemned, we need not enter into an exposure of its demerits. It is of more importance to vindicate the expediency of popular election in opposition to patronage, and for this purpose consider what an evil influence the latter system must exert in the formation of the ministerial character. How surely must its existence taint the motives and misdirect the labors of aspirants to the ministry. Instead of expecting success under the divine blessing in his efforts to secure advancement in his profession through the esteem of his fellow Christians, a student is led to cultivate, with care too apt to degenerate into obsequiousness, the favor of a single man, and it would be some mitigation of the degrading task were security provided that the patron should be professedly, at least, under the influence of sound religion. But when the candidate for the sacred office must compass the object of his hallowed ambition by application to a man, steeped, it may be, in the infamy of every vice, the degradation is complete. Though the people should concur in receiving him as their minister, how revolting, if not to the conscience, at least to the feelings of any man built up in the integrity of Christian principle, and jealous with a sacred jealousy for the honor of an office instituted by the authority and designed to promote the glory of his loved Redeemer, when the initial step by which he becomes a minister of Christ is taken by a patron, lost perhaps to all the decencies of life, and intent upon damaging the interests of religion. But even were provision made that Christian profession should be requisite to the enjoyment of the right of patronage, there may be such habits and prejudices fostered in the minds of men looking to patrons for promotion as seriously to injure the likelihood of ministerial usefulness. There may be generated such obsequiousness to the opinions of the higher ranks of society as may unfit a man for the exercise of that vigorous and unswerving impartiality which, on the authority of inspiration, we must regard as a distinguishing feature of Christian character. The contempt of the people must ensue, and the ends of the ministry might thus be wholly defeated. Even irreligious men can see the difference between a Latimer, bold in the reproval of abounding vice, though it were gilded by the sparkle of a coronet, and a Montgomery who, to serve the purposes of a royal minion, would stoop to simony and sacrilege. They fear, though they hate, the former. They despise, though they befriend the latter. Most freely do we grant that multitudes of the clergy have risen superior to the temptations which patronage presents to indulge in sycophancy. But our present argument relates to the general tendencies of the system, that it has an unhappy effect upon candidates for the ministerial office in directing their minds to an improper avenue to professional advancement cannot honestly be denied. It is in vain to retort that under a system of popular election, candidates may fawn upon the people. We may safely reckon upon some degree of shrewdness and discernment in a congregation, by which in general the employment of unworthy artificers to gain their favor may be counteracted, and in proportion to their number the chances of detection are multiplied. The evil influence which patronage exercises on the minds of aspirants to the ministry does not cease when they are fully invested with its sacred functions. Gratitude to a patron may inspire them with forbearance to his views and inclinations. Not to travel beyond the question of patronage for an illustration, are they under no temptations to waive the condemnation of a system to which they are in part indebted for their ministerial standing, and in grateful deference to him who has exercised his civil right in their favor? Are they under no temptation to regard favorably any views adverse to the rights of the people, if these views lend color and consistency to their own connivance at a system by which they have been introduced into the ministry? May they not be led to palliate gross Erastianism? May they not even advance to the assertion of tenets impugning the right of private judgment, and thus borrow weapons for the promotion of their cause from the armory of the Vatican? How much of this laxity of sentiment must be ascribed to the fatal necessities of a false position? How easily were it checked by suffering the people to exercise the rights of which patronage denudes them?